They say every town has its secrets, but some are buried so deep they don't want to be found. In a quiet valley in northern Vermont, surrounded by fog-soaked hills and whispering birch trees, lies the story of a family that disappeared not once but twice. Records erased, names changed, graves dug and then sealed again. No one in town speaks their name aloud anymore, not since the night the lights went out in Hollow Creek and an entire bloodline was wiped from history. It began with a farmhouse, white paint, cracked and peeling, a porch that creaked even when no one stood on it. For decades, travelers passed it on the back road that led out of town. They said if you drove by too slowly, the temperature inside your car would drop and you'd see movement in the windows. Not shadows, but faces, watching, waiting. But the horror of this place didn't start with ghosts. It started with something real, something human. In the late 1800s, the Wilmer family settled there, respected, hardworking, known for their prosperity. But prosperity breeds envy, and envy breeds silence. The townsfolk began to notice strange behavior. The Wilmers refused to visit church. Their children never attended school, and the windows of their home were always covered from the inside. When questioned, the patriarch, Elias Wilmer, would only smile and say, "We keep to our own." Then, one winter, the town doctor was called to the Wilmer farm. He never came back. His horse was found the next morning, wandering near the frozen river, its reins snapped. The tracks in the snow led straight to the Wilmer house and stopped at the door. The sheriff went to investigate. The door was open. Inside, no one, no bodies, no footprints, just a house, still warm from the fire, dinner still set on the table. And in the center of that table was a single lock of hair, braided, bound with twine, and underneath it a note that read, "She's finally clean." From that night on, no one spoke of the Wilmers again. But over a century later, when the property was sold and excavations began, something was found beneath the cellar floor. Something that should never have survived this long. Something that wasn't dead. They found it by accident. The new owners of the land, a retired couple looking to build a cabin, had hired a small crew to clear out the old foundation of the Wilmer farmhouse. When the first layer of dirt was removed, one of the workers' shovels struck wood. Not floorboards, a box thick, sealed, and covered in pitch black tar, the kind used in the 19th century to preserve the dead. They thought it was an old chest, maybe valuables hidden from a war long past. But when the foreman pried it open, the air changed. Even men who'd spent their lives digging through the earth said the smell wasn't of decay. It was sharp, chemical, and wrong, as if the ground itself had tried to reject what was buried there. Inside the box were 7 glass jars, each wrapped in layers of aged cloth. The jars were filled with a murky liquid, the color of dried blood, and each contained something. Not bones, not organs. Something in between. Pieces that looked like they'd once been human. Small, frail, almost infant-like, but distorted. One had 2 spines fused together. Another, a face too smooth, too symmetrical, like wax melted and reformed. The sheriff sealed the site. The couple left town within a week, never returning for their deposit. The jars were sent to the county coroner, who could only confirm one thing. Whatever was in those jars had been preserved deliberately, and whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. For months, nothing more came to light. But then, during the coroner's final report, he noticed something no one else had. Scratched faintly into the glass of each jar, almost invisible unless caught by the right light, was a symbol. The same symbol, a circle split into 3 uneven parts, like a crude family crest. And when those marks were compared to old town records, a connection emerged. That same insignia appeared in a series of documents dating back to 1874. Land deeds, birth certificates, even death notices, all belonging to one family, the Wilmers. Only now, something didn't add up. According to the historical census, there were never 7 Wilmer children, only 5. So where did the other 2 come from, and what were they preserving beneath their home? The deeper historians dug, the more they realized this wasn't just a family secret. It was a ritual, a tradition meant to keep something alive. The deeper the investigation went, the stranger the history became. Old letters surfaced, letters written by Elias Wilmer himself, discovered in a dusty courthouse archive mislabeled as property disputes. They weren't about land, they were about blood. In one of the earliest letters, Elias wrote to a doctor in Boston, describing a sickness of the flesh that runs in our line. a deformity of the soul that no prayer nor purge can cleanse. He spoke of offspring born with the mark, and how he believed his family carried a heritage not meant for the daylight. Historians thought he meant hereditary disease, until they read the last paragraph. He wrote, "I've seen them live longer than they should. The ones born with the mark, they do not die easy. Fire cannot claim them. The cold does not touch them, and when they speak, it's not in words." For years, that was dismissed as madness. But there was one chilling detail that kept returning: the same circle symbol, etched at the bottom of every letter, drawn in ink so dark it had eaten through the page. When the historian who uncovered the letters visited the old Wilmer property for research, she brought an EMF reader and an old tape recorder, not for superstition, but to document any environmental data. The recorder picked up something that still unsettles audio engineers to this day. When she entered the old cellar, the air was still. But on the recording, beneath her footsteps, you can hear something faint, like breath, slow, rhythmic, coming from below the dirt. And then, a voice, a whisper, repeating over and over, "He kept us clean. No one has been able to explain it." The historian never returned to Hollow Creek. Within months, she left her position at the university, telling colleagues she'd been having nightmares of glass breaking and children laughing. But there's something more disturbing about the timeline, because the letters stopped abruptly in 1893, the same year the entire Wilmer family vanished. And yet, there's one final, unsigned note found on the back of the last letter. The blood remembers what the mind forgets. The harvest must begin again. Whatever the Wilmers were doing, it didn't end with them. It only went underground. And if you follow the paper trail far enough, you find that the land didn't stay empty for long. Someone came back. 21 years after the Wilmers vanished, a new name appeared on the county land registry: Thomas and Margaret Alcott. The Alcotts were not locals. They came from New York, seeking quiet farmland and isolation. The deed they purchased listed no previous owner, only a single word scrawled in the corner: inherited. Locals warned them about the property. They called it bad ground. But the Alcotts didn't believe in curses. They were practical people. For the first few months, life was peaceful. They restored the house, reopened the well, and even planted crops. But then the small things began. The cows stopped producing milk. Chickens laid eggs with shells too thin to hold. Their dog, Baxter, refused to go near the cellar. He'd sit outside it for hours, teeth bared, growling at something unseen. Margaret wrote about it in her journal. Her handwriting was elegant, steady at first, until the entries grew frantic. One in particular stands out, dated November 3rd, 1914. She wrote, "Thomas dug too deep today. He found glass. I told him to leave it, but he said it was just an old jar. He brought it inside. I could smell it before I saw it. That same sharp, sweet rot. He said it was filled with mud, but I saw it move." The next few pages were torn out. 3 days later, the Alcott's nearest neighbor rode into town, pale and shaking. He said he'd seen smoke rising from their farmhouse. When he arrived to help, the building was already gone, burned to the foundation. No bodies were found, but in the ashes, investigators discovered something else: melted glass. 7 fragments arranged in a circle. The sheriff at the time, Samuel Dorn, filed a single-page report. One sentence stood out: no sign of the family. But the cellar remains untouched, sealed by stone. Not a single brick has shifted. Over the next decade, strange events surrounded Hollow Creek. Farmers reported hearing babies crying through the fog. Travelers claimed they saw people standing in the fields at dusk, pale, motionless, their faces turned toward the ruins of the old Wilmer land. The town began to shrink. Families moved away. Schools closed. By the 1930s, Hollow Creek had vanished from most maps, but the cellar was still there, waiting. And in 1952, a team of state surveyors, unaware of the history, broke the seal. What they found inside would be sealed again, by the government this time. The surveyors weren't ghost hunters or historians. They were ordinary men, state employees tasked with mapping flood zones along the northern Vermont valleys. Their work was routine, unremarkable, until their instruments led them to a patch of earth where the readings didn't make sense. One of them, a man named Robert Mace, later said the ground felt wrong. The soil was colder than it should have been, even in summer. Their metal detectors picked up faint magnetic interference that pulsed almost like a heartbeat. When they dug, they hit stone, A circular slab, perfectly fitted with a seam running around its edge like a lid. They pried it open. Beneath it was a set of steps carved into solid rock. No one could explain how such precision existed in a farmhouse cellar from the 1800s. It descended 15 feet into the earth. The walls were lined with smooth black residue, not soot, not mold, but something waxy that shimmered in the light of their lamps. At the bottom was a chamber, empty at first glance. Then Mace noticed the carvings. Every inch of the walls was etched with that same symbol. The circle divided in 3, and within those divisions names, dozens of them, some repeated over and over, like a family tree that looped back on itself. In the center of the room stood a single object, a tall glass cylinder 6 feet high, filled with cloudy fluid. Inside it was something suspended, not skeletal, not quite human. Its skin was gray, stretched thin over sharp bone, with a face that looked almost serene. Its eyes were closed, and for the sake of their sanity, they prayed it stayed that way. The surveyors fled. The site was reported to the state, which quickly took control. Officially, it was labeled a hazardous materials zone and sealed. But local rumors tell a different story, that one of the men never came back, Robert Mace. His wife said he stopped sleeping. He'd wake in the night and whisper things like, "It's not dead," and "They can hear through the glass." 3 months later, he disappeared. His truck was found abandoned outside Hollow Creek. Inside was his survey map, with a new set of markings drawn in red ink, a trail leading deeper into the woods, and at the end of that trail, circled 3 times, he'd written one word: leave. When the state sealed off Hollow Creek, they didn't just close a site, they erased it. Roads were rerouted, maps redrawn. Even aerial photos from the decade after the surveyor's discovery show only forest where the farmhouse once stood. But some things can't be buried forever. In 1978, a journalist named Daniel Pryor, working for a small investigative magazine out of Boston, stumbled across a declassified set of memos from the Vermont Department of Health. The memos mentioned biological material of undetermined origin, recovered from a private property in Caledonia County. The same coordinates as Hollow Creek. Pryor drove there himself. It took him 3 days to find the old back road, now overgrown and nearly impassable. He parked, hiked the final mile, and described what he saw as clearing where sound itself felt thinner, as though the forest refused to echo. He found remnants of the stone foundation. More importantly, he found glass, shards melted into the dirt, glinting in the light like frozen tears. He collected samples, photographed the carvings that still clung to the surviving stones, and sent everything to a lab in Burlington. A week later, the lab called him. They couldn't identify what the residue was. It wasn't glass, resin, or any known organic compound. When tested under ultraviolet light, it emitted a faint red glow, pulsing every 7 seconds. That same night, Pryor received a call from an unlisted number. The voice on the other end said only one thing: "You shouldn't have opened it." Then the line went dead. He published his findings anyway, a 5-page spread titled The Wilmer Bloodline, a New England haunting or human experimentation. It ran for only 1 issue before the magazine abruptly folded. Within months, Pryor was dead. His car was found overturned off a rural highway, burned beyond recognition. The official cause: engine failure. But locals who saw the wreck said the windshield wasn't shattered outward, it was shattered inward, as if something had forced its way in. After his death, the samples he collected vanished. The lab denied ever receiving them. His photographs never resurfaced. But one tape from his field recorder survived, never published, kept in a private collection. In the recording, you can hear Daniel Pryor breathing heavily, then stopping. And under that silence, the faintest sound: glass cracking. After Pryor's death, Hollow Creek became more myth than memory. A whispered story passed between truckers, hunters, and anyone foolish enough to camp near the valley. Locals said the air there never felt right. The mist lingered longer, and birds avoided flying over it. But beneath the folklore, the truth was still festering, waiting for someone to notice. In 1994, a team of graduate students from the University of Vermont found Pryor's article in an archived microfilm and decided to make it their thesis project. The group was led by a student named Sarah Litton, whose family, she later discovered, had distant ties to the region. They called it Project Hollow. Their goal was to separate myth from fact. The team spent a month in the valley, camping near what they believed was the old Wilmer site. They collected soil samples, mapped magnetic fields, and even interviewed the few remaining locals, elderly people who spoke of the Wilmer curse, like it was a wound that never healed. One old man told them, "It's not a ghost story, it's a blood story. The land remembers who fed it." Then, in their second week, the recordings began. Every night, they heard tapping sounds around their tents. Slow, rhythmic, Sarah thought it was animals, until one night she tapped back. The sound paused, then mimicked her pattern exactly. 2 students left the next morning. The rest stayed. By day 17, all of their compass readings were off by several degrees. Their instruments shorted out near the ruins. Their camp stove stopped working. Sarah wrote in her journal, "The ground hums when I touch it, like it's breathing." On the 20th night, a storm hit. Winds so fierce they tore through trees like paper. When rescue teams arrived 2 days later, the camp was destroyed. The students were gone, but their camera was found half buried near the foundation. The film inside was water-damaged but partially recoverable. The final frame, now stored in the university's restricted archive, shows a woman's face pressed against glass, mouth open, eyes wide, as if she were screaming underwater. Experts claimed it was double exposure. Others said it was impossible. The texture of the glass didn't match anything in the frame. Sarah Litton's body was never found, but weeks later, her family received a package in the mail. Inside was a small jar filled with dark liquid and a note. "She's clean now." After the tragedy of Project Hollow, the state once again sealed off the valley. No public explanation was ever given, only warnings of unstable ground and chemical contamination. But people who lived nearby said that for months afterward, they could see lights in the forest at night, not lanterns or headlights, white, flickering glows that moved in deliberate lines, as if following invisible paths through the trees. Then came the disappearances. From 1996 to 2003, at least 9 hikers went missing in the area surrounding Hollow Creek. No bodies were ever recovered, but each case had one thing in common. Every search team reported finding traces of melted glass along the forest floor, embedded in roots like veins of ice. The media barely touched it. Local authorities called it coincidence. But one man, a retired sheriff named Paul Dorn, the grandson of the original sheriff who'd investigated the Alcott's fire, didn't believe that. Paul began collecting every missing person report linked to the region. The deeper he looked, the clearer the pattern became. The names of the victims matched old Wilmer records. Distant cousins, great-great-grandchildren, people who had no idea their blood tied them to that vanished family. It was as if the land was calling its own back home. In 2004, Paul drove into Hollow Creek himself. He left behind a recorder, a map, and a note, "If they want me, they'll have me." But this ends tonight. He never returned. A month later, a park ranger discovered his abandoned truck just outside the old Wilmer boundary. Inside was his recorder, still running. The first hour is nothing but static, then faint breathing. Paul's voice, trembling, "I found the cellar. It's open again." What follows is silence, and then a sound like glass being dragged across stone. At the very end of the tape, just before it cuts off, there's a voice, not Paul's. It's soft, almost childlike, whispering a phrase the Wilmers had written a century before. "The blood remembers." The state confiscated the recorder. The official report said only that Sheriff Dorn succumbed to exposure in hazardous terrain. But those who knew him claimed otherwise, because 2 weeks after his disappearance, his wife received an unmarked package. Inside was a piece of glass, shaped like a teardrop, and behind it, the reflection of something that wasn't her own face. By the early 2010s, Hollow Creek had become legend, a ghost story traded in online forums and late-night radio shows. Urban explorers posted grainy videos claiming to have found the glass fields. Most were hoaxes, stitched together with cheap effects and shaky cameras. But one video, uploaded in 2015 and deleted within 24 hours, was different. It was titled, "The Clean Ones Found Footage of Vermont 1952, and showed no faces, no narration, just a slow walk through what appeared to be an underground chamber. The floor glistened like wet marble. The camera passed walls carved with hundreds of circular symbols, identical to those described in the old records. The footage ended with a close-up of something submerged in a cylinder of liquid, a pale shape twitching as bubbles rose around it. The account that posted it was traced to an IP address in Boston, the same university that had once run Project Hollow. The video was pulled, but by then, a few people had saved it. Those who watched it described a low hum playing throughout, too deep to be from any known frequency. Some said the hum continued long after the video ended, faintly, through their headphones. A year later, a former state contractor came forward under anonymity. He claimed that Hollow Creek had been quietly purchased by a private biomedical firm in 2008. The company's stated mission, historical contamination remediation. But according to his testimony, what they really found wasn't contamination. It was preservation. He said the chamber under the Wilmer site was far larger than anyone realized. Not a single room, but a complex of tunnels leading deep beneath the earth. The glass wasn't natural, and it wasn't man-made. It was growing. When exposed to light, it pulsed faintly like something living. Samples taken to labs degraded instantly, as though they refused to exist outside the soil. The contractor's final claim was the most disturbing. He said one of the lead scientists had attempted to drain a preserved cylinder to analyze the body within. The next day, she resigned. No reason given, but on her exit paperwork next to the line that asked reason for departure, she had written 2 words: "It breathed." The government sealed the site again in 2017, this time permanently, but even sealed things can still spread. And locals say when the fog is heavy, you can still hear it, that low hum, drifting through the trees like the sound of glass cracking under pressure. The official narrative of Hollow Creek ends there, buried under redacted files, anonymous interviews, and land deeds that lead nowhere. But unofficially, the story continues, because every few years someone new hears the call. In 2020, a podcast host named Rebecca Hale began investigating old American disappearances. She stumbled across the Wilmer case while researching for an episode on familial hauntings. At first, it was just another strange historical thread, but soon, her listeners started sending her messages, dozens of them, claiming they had ancestors from Caledonia County. Some even sent family photos, old and sepia-stained, and in the corners of several of those pictures, faintly visible, was that same divided circle scratched into the film itself. Rebecca recorded an episode titled "The Ones Who Stayed Clean." It was released on a Friday night. Within hours, her audience exploded. People said they could hear whispers in the background of the recording, voices she hadn't included in the final cut. Some claimed the voices were repeating the same phrase over and over: "Hey, kept us clean." 2 days later, Rebecca posted an update on social media, taking a short break. Feeling unwell, she was never seen again. Her apartment was found empty. The only thing left behind was her microphone, still plugged in, still recording. The audio lasts for 27 minutes. For the first 26, there's only silence. Then, faintly, the sound of someone knocking. 3 times, slow, rhythmic. When forensic analysts studied the file, they discovered something else. Embedded data inside the audio spectrum that wasn't supposed to be there. A pattern repeating every 7 seconds. A perfect circle, divided into 3 parts. That same week, Hollow Creek was briefly mentioned in a classified military report leaked online, marked non-biological pathogen containment. It was removed within hours, but not before thousands downloaded it. One line from that report still circulates on dark web forums. Exposure to resonance field causes acute cognitive recall of ancestral memory. Infected subjects identify as Wilmer descendants regardless of genealogy. Whatever the Wilmers unleashed, it wasn't just a curse or a haunting or even a disease. It was memory itself, something that crawls down the bloodline, reshaping what it finds, reminding every generation of what the first family started. And the question that remains, even now, if memory can rot, what happens when it wakes up?